Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Lunatics Radio Hour podcast. I'm Abby Brinker, sitting here with Alan Kudan.
Hello.
And today we are talking about the history of time travel.
Speaking about going back in time.
Yes.
We're back.
We moved again. I know it feels like we just moved, and that's not wrong.
But now we're in the original Lunatic studio.
Now we've moved back to where we started, and we're settled in, and we appreciate your patience with us while we changed our lives completely once again.
Can we just reflect for a moment that moving sucks?
Moving is the worst.
But at least this place is acoustically treated.
I'm going to apologize to everyone in every aspect of my life broadly right now, just for anything that happened in the last month.
I'm going to say since last 2 months.
Yeah, it was a
This is terrible.
long runway on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hey, here we are.
And it feels so good.
In the present.
Yes.
About to talk about time travel.
And the future.
Yes, and the future.
And the past.
Yeah, it's a time travel thing. It's implied.
Before we get into it, and there is certainly quite a bit to get into, let me rattle through the sources for today.
Wikipedia.
If you want to start there, yes. Wikipedia and IMDB for movie facts. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the entry on time travel. An Oxford.com article on ancient time-traveling myths. The Paradoxes of Time Travel by David Lewis, which is an article from Princeton University, 1975. A Guardian article by Stuart Heritage, the 20 best time travel movies. A CrimeReads article by Dan Frey called The 4 Types of Time Travel and What They Say About Ourselves and the World Around Us. A Screen Rant article by Craig Elvy, Back to the Future's Time Travel Explained. A Wondrium article by David K. Johnson, Ph.D., Time Travel and Interstellar. Space.com article by Alisa, Harvey, and Vicky Stein, Is Time Travel Possible?
Well, don't leave us hanging, is it?
Listen to the end of the episode.
What, we're going to end there?
Yeah.
Oh.
But we're going to start by defining time travel.
So we're gonna end at the beginning.
I want to say, as usual, this is a broad topic, right? And so there's a difference between traveling through time and, say, someone sleeping for 20 years and missing time.
Sure, like a coma.
Right. But also, like, even if that's more science fiction-y induced or mythically induced, we're going to get into it. But I just want to say there's a few different versions of time jumps, time loops, what time manipulation means when it comes to literature and film.
So that's a good point. Like Captain America is considered a time traveler because he was frozen in ice for 50 years.
Exactly.
Also, as long as we're bringing up broad topics, I think it's worth noting that we're not talking exclusively about a horror topic this time.
Yeah, it's science fiction-y.
It is, but this is something that we don't often cover.
Yeah. And there isn't a ton. There's a few horror time travel movies, which we'll talk about, but usually I can kind of scrape together some horror, but this one feels squarely science fiction.
I'd say the vast majority is science fiction.
Yeah.
As we're going to discuss, time travel and time shenanigans can make for some really horrific things.
True. Very true.
It's all just about how you use it.
Yeah.
It's like a hammer,
Wow. Yeah, that was blunt. See? It was a good joke.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote here from David Lewis's paper, The Paradoxes of Time Travel. Quote, "What is time travel?
What is it?
Inevitably, it involves a discrepancy between time and time. Any traveler departs and then arrives at his destination. The time elapsed from departure to arrival, positive or perhaps zero, is the duration of the journey. But if he is a time traveler, the separation in time between departure and arrival does not equal the duration of his journey. He departs, he travels for an hour, let us say, then he arrives. The time he reaches is not the time 1 hour after his departure. It is later if he has traveled towards the future, earlier if he has traveled towards the past. If he has traveled far towards the past, it is even earlier than his departure." Now, I know what you're going to say, Alan. That was a totally unnecessary and roundabout quote, which is exactly why I included it, because it's from this 1975 paper, and I thought it was just incredibly charming, out of Princeton.
Sorry, I was really distracted because you unlocked a memory I haven't thought about in a very long time.
Oh, jeez.
Like, this was probably like first grade or second grade, and there was just a kid that's like, he was just trying to convince everyone that he was a time traveler. And then everyone's like, show us, show us.
Was it you?
No. And he's like, here I go. I'm about to travel. I'm going to travel into the future at 1 second per second. And everyone just...
Yeah, sounds like a real nerd.
Stares, yes.
Yeah, he's a
that's
astrophysicist
I think
now.
that's one of the reasons why I kind of forgot about it until this moment. Yeah, it's just a big letdown. I'm sorry for telling that story. I think I'm equally as disappointed now as I was then.
No, I think it's a classic kid joke. Before we get into the history and the mythology, I'm going to outline the 4 types of time travel that Dan Frey highlights in the CrimeReads article so that we have a frame of reference throughout this episode. 1, seeing the future or information that travels through time. So here Frey gives examples like the Lake House or a Minority Report to help explain. It's like...
I'm sorry, what's the Lake House?
It's a Sandra Bullock film. There's like letters being left in a mailbox from like her former self.
There's a Sandra Bullock time travel movie?
There's 2. There's Premonition and there's Lake House.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
What the heck?
She's truly the best of us.
I've been watching all these I've been Googling like time travel movies and just watching this bunch of garbage.
Yeah.
And I could have been watching Sandra Bullock?
In 2 movies.
My goodness.
Double feature. The second example is traveling to the future, right? So a great example, according to Frey, is H.G. Wells's The Time Machine, which we will also talk about. The third example is traveling to the past, which of course includes the complexity of changing the past or timelines of events sometimes. A good example of that is Back to the Future. There are time loops like Happy Death Day. And a 5th category that I'm adding, which isn't technically time travel, but it's going to come up a lot today, is the passage of time via suspended animation. So that...
Rip Van Winkle.
Exactly. Rip Van Winkle. It could be due to sleep. Sometimes you'll see as we talk through some like mythology around this, it's that time travels differently in different planets, right? So that's kind of a reason for that. But none of it is like that you're jetting into the future or the past.
Sure.
I have one more lengthy quote for you before we get into it.
Okay.
This is a quote from Craig Elvy's Screen Rant article. Quote, broadly speaking, there are 3 interpretations of time travel's effects in fiction. The what happened hypothesis posits that alternating history is impossible, and any attempt to do so might even cause whatever the traveler is trying to avoid.
Almost like object fixation.
Examples of this can be found in Lost and Terminator, where John Connor sends his best friend back in time to impregnate his mother.
What? It's so complicated, though. I gotta stop you right there, Abby. You can't just softball in the big reveal of the first Terminator. Oh my goodness, Abby. So he's sent back to safeguard the birth of John Connor.
Okay, great.
He had no idea that the guy he was sending back was actually going to become the father. It's weird to be like, I need you to go become my dad. He didn't say those words.
Well, something similar happens in Back to the Future.
They hit on it. Well,
even worse. Okay, the second variant is the quote-unquote multiple timelines idea. Visiting the past and changing history creates a breakaway reality, separate from the original, where any alterations play out. Thanks to Avengers Endgame, we know that the MCU utilizes this format. The last model, and the one Back to the Future subscribes to, is the single changeable timeline. There are no multiple branch realities, and changing the past has a corresponding effect on the present day.
Okay, can you break these down quickly into how many types were there total?
There's 3 in this second, kind of definition from Craig Elvy. 1 is the what happened hypothesis, right?
The fixed timeline.
Fixed timeline. 2 is multiple timelines.
Yep, the multiverse theory.
And then the third is a single changeable timeline, Back to the Future.
Yes. Okay, gotcha.
Let's talk about the history of the concept of time travel. When we look at mythology and religious references to time travel, many seem to focus on the reality of time or the passage of time. Science fiction delves more into the hopping around of the timeline. So that's where we're starting today, mythology and religion.
I'm trying to think of... I can't think of any mythological time travelers off the top of my head?
For example, in Hindu mythology, the Vishnu Purana in ancient text tells the story of a king who journeys to heaven to meet the creator, only to return to earth and find that many, many years have passed. And this feels somehow like modern to me, I guess, the idea of an astronaut going to space, knowing that when they return, all of their loved ones will have passed away, right? Because the idea that time in the wormhole they're going to, or in this case, in heaven, passes differently than it does on Earth.
Wait, you talking about time dilation?
What's time dilation?
Exactly what you're saying.
Oh, then yes.
Yep.
Great. Now I have a name for it.
Mm-hmm.
We also see something similar in Jewish mythology. Hani Hamiagel was a Jewish scholar from the 1st century who supposedly slept for 70 years before waking up. We also see a similar pattern in Japanese mythology, when Urashima sets out on a journey into the sea and comes back 300 years later.
Dang.
There are also concepts of time passing differently in different places. For example, one of Buddha's disciples explains how time passes differently on Earth and in heaven. So it's something that's, there wasn't like a ton of really meaty information out there for me on this, but I wanted to kind of highlight some examples, right? I'm sure there's more, but just to give a flavor of when we're looking in like early religious texts or mythology, how time comes up. And it's and if somebody knows of a time traveler example from any of this, early writing, I would love to know about it. But what I found more so was concepts around time traveling differently in different places, especially in heaven, and also this idea of people sleeping or journeying, right, and coming back way later than would be realistic.
I think it's from, as soon as you said the difference in rates at which time passes between, Earth and heaven, it reminded me, I think of Constantine. So, the Marvel comic. No, the DC comic.
Isn't Keanu Reeves in the movie?
The live action adaptation, yes. Yeah, John Constantine is the character, but his comic book is called Hellblazer. But I don't remember. I've just read so much of it. I don't know if it's from the comic or if it's from one of the many animated movies or live action or whatever. Actually, time dilation comes into play big in the live action adaptation. But the premise is that time in hell passes so much faster than on Earth. What that means is that, Constantine fights demons, right? So demons hate Constantine. And so when Constantine died, his heart was stopped just for a few seconds, but that was enough to experience full lifetimes worth of being tortured in hell before the paramedics or whoever got his heart running again.
Damn.
Which is one of the reasons why he just goes to great lengths to avoid dying and going back to hell.
Yeah, I bet. That's terrifying.
Actually, yeah, in the live action movie, he uses time dilation. No, I can't spoil this
Don't
movie.
spoil it.
It's
yeah.
so
Just
good.
everyone go watch Constantine. Keanu Reeves.
Yeah,
Reason enough.
Wow. It's that movie is such a.
He has long hair in it, right?
I have such a mixed bag. I have so many mixed emotions about that film. Because first off, I love anything with Keanu Reeves, right?
1,000%.
And I love John Constantine as a character. The execution of this film was a little lackluster. However, I just love the world that they build. And it's so freaking cool. Just anytime you have, a biblical scale battle in like gritty New York, like that's cool. I like that. And there's definitely not enough of it in live action media. There's some really, really amazing and very dark Constantine movies that are animated, have recently come out in the DC animated universe. This has nothing to do with time travel. I'm just riffing on John Constantine right now because he's just such a freaking cool guy. But if anybody has, they're all on HBO Max, and you can just binge them. They're so good.
There you go. But have you seen Keanu Reeves in Babes in Toyland? Maybe his best work yet.
You made me watch it.
A classic. It's Christmas themed, but you can watch it any time of the year, in my opinion.
But I think it's called Constantine's City of Demons, something like that. There's like an old Aztec god that, is long forgotten, and he just like lives underground underneath a slaughterhouse because he just like feeds off the little bit of death energy from every every pig that gets slaughtered, and like that's the only thing that's like keeping his soul anchored from just dissipating into oblivion.
Rock and roll,
Like,
man.
that's pretty cool, right?
When looking for the earliest examples of time travel in literature, it's hard to pin down one work. But I will say this. I was surprised by how early some relevant pieces date back. So I'm going to throw you a handful of examples.
Okay.
There's a Chinese novel from 1640 called Supplement to the Journey to the West by Dong Yu, which is fascinating. The mechanic of time travel here functions using portals and mirrors that connect different points in time. And I looked this up because it was interesting. So this novel itself is meant to act as an addendum to the novel Journey to the West, which is a famous book from the Ming Dynasty dating back to the 1500s. And it's often considered one of the most famous classic Chinese works of fiction.
Yeah, I'd say it's one of the most famous works of fiction ever.
And so this came out like, a few hundred years later, called Supplement 2. And it plays with this idea of hopping around through time via portals and mirrors.
Yeah, neat. That's neat.
You read the original. What do you think? Worth reading?
I mean, the original is a loaded statement. Just because obviously originally was written in Chinese. And every time that there's like a new translation, like it changes a little bit.
Sure.
And the version I read was a pretty modern translation where it was translated for intent rather than for grammatic accuracy.
Right.
And, obviously both have their merits.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this, like, they updated the language so it doesn't sound super dated.
Sure.
And, yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's the story of, like, the first superhero.
Oh.
It's probably not true, but it's a very early superhero.
Sure.
You're following Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, who just gets all of these incredible abilities and just, like, fights. I was about to say fights evil, but not necessarily because he's just such a wild spirit. So Journey to the West was the direct inspiration for the first Dragon Ball series.
Oh, cool.
Hence even why, like, the main characters have monkey tails.
That's cute.
And Goku has this little power pole that extends very long.
Aw. I could just write a book called Supplement to Frankenstein. That's like kind of what this author did.
You could?
Yeah.
Do it.
Like that's what they did.
I dare you.
Okay. In 1733, a novel called Memoirs of the 12th Century was published by Samuel Madden. Also an interesting structure, Memoirs of the 12th Century is an epistolary novel that features letters from politicians of the future writing to politicians of the past. The letters, or I suppose the present, the letters are delivered via guardian angel. And Alan, remember we learned epistolary during our found footage series.
That's right. It's a collection of first-hand accounts.
Sort of. It's a collection of, in this case, the fact that the book is made up of letters.
Or it could be interviews.
Sure, it could be anything, yeah. But it's not, like, historically
No,
accurate.
it's all fiction, but first-hand accounts. They're usually told in the first person.
It could be a collection of newspaper clippings.
Sure.
Rip Van Winkle was written by our friend Washington Irving, who also wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, in 1819. Rip Van Winkle is a character who falls asleep for 20 years and misses the American Revolution. Again, less on the science fiction spectrum, more on the religious and early mythology spectrum.
What's religious about Rip Van Winkle?
No, not that it's religious, just that some of those early examples I had were like based in religion and religious mythology.
I see.
Yeah. You've read Rip Van Winkle?
No. However, I did see the Wishbone special about it.
Ah, an expert.
Which is really cute because, it's a wishbone. And, he just goes to sleep, I think, like under a tree or something. And then just like wakes up, shimmies out of like all the leaves and stuff and has a big beard strapped to him.
Wow.
It's really cute.
I just want to acknowledge for everyone listening that Alan just paused the recording. We watched the majority of what felt like the Wishbone Rip Van Winkle episode to get to the end where he has a beard and he's in the leaves.
It's so cute. Look at him.
He's paused on the TV right now.
You got to make this the thumbnail.
No, it's ridiculous. Such a well-trained dog.
Really is.
There are many more historical examples, But let's skip to the evolution of time travel as a subgenre within science fiction. In 1881, a story was published in the New York Sun called The Clock That Went Backward. It was written by Edward Page Mitchell. The interesting thing is that this story predates H.G. Wells' story called The Time Machine by a handful of years. But Wells gets all the credit for being the first writer to explore a device that transports somebody through time. However, The Clock That Went Backward was largely unknown, and it's unlikely Wells knew about it before he wrote his story. And The Clock That Went Backwards was not republished again until the 1970s. So it was originally published in a magazine, right? And then kind of that was it until the 1970s when someone came across it.
Clearly, it was quite a hit.
Yes. As you might expect, the mechanic here is that winding a clock's hand backwards would transport the operator back in time.
Dang, it's that simple, huh?
That simple.
Never tried that.
Never? Never played around with a watch?
Nah, I've done it accidentally. You're like, God damn it.
The first popularized concept of a time machine in pop culture is often attributed to H.G. Wells' first novel from 1895, titled The Time Machine. And Wells actually coined the term time machine. The high-level overview is that a Victorian-era scientist claims to have not only invented a time machine, but has also used it to travel to the future, where he finds that humanity has evolved into two different races or species.
Wow.
It's riddled with social commentary, as you might expect.
I've never read it. I just remember seeing, 2006 live-action version.
And if you listen to our next episode, you might get a little taste. We talked about Wells a lot during our series on The Invisible Man, of course, because he wrote it. And it's important to pause on him now as well. Wells is often thought of as the father of science fiction, at least in a modern sense of the term. He not only spun up this genre that is so near and dear to so many people, but also was quite well known during his life for social criticism, which is often present in his work. Skipping ahead a little, in 1952, Ray Bradbury's short story, A Sound of Thunder, was published in Collier's magazine. The story is often credited as coining the term the butterfly effect. Quoting from Wikipedia, quote, "A Sound of Thunder is often credited as the origin of the term butterfly effect, a concept of chaos theory in which the flapping of a butterfly's wings in one part of the world could create a hurricane on the opposite side of the globe. The term was actually introduced by meteorologist Edward Norton Lorenz in the 1960s. However, Bradbury's concept of how the death of a butterfly in the past could have drastic changes in the future is a representation of the butterfly effect and is used as an example of how to consider chaos theory in the physics of time travel."
Have you read any Bradbury?
I haven't. Have you?
I've never been able to get into him. I've always wanted to. I've been recommended The Martian Chronicles often.
Oh, I read The Martian.
The Martian Chronicles or The Martian?
Different?
Yes. One is about a guy stuck on Mars.
I read that one.
Yeah, that's great. Mark Watney.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's a great one. Starring Matt Damon in the live action movie.
Saw that as well.
Yeah, great film. No time travel. Not true, actually, because astronauts experience time at a slightly different rate than on Earth just due to gravitational differences.
Exactly.
But no, the Martian Chronicles are very different. I don't actually know what they're about. I've tried to go in blind a few times and just can't get into it. But it's just on the list of I know it's going to be an amazing book. I just got to stick with it.
Yeah, totally. The time has come for us to discuss how time travel intersects with film. And I want to just get this out of the way because this is, I think, must be the most well-known example in our era of time travel in pop culture. Let's talk about the Back to the Future trilogy.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Trunks and Dragon Ball Z, but go ahead.
The original film debuted in 1985 and remains incredibly popular and well-regarded. Directed by Robert Zemeckis, written by Zemeckis and Bob Gale, Back to the Future stars Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly. I also love the UK tagline, which reads, "The only kid to ever get in trouble before he was born."
Oh, that's a great one.
I'm going to quote again from the Screen Rant article by Craig Elvy. Back to the Future is also regularly dubbed the perfect film. And it's not hard to see why. With vibrant characters, fascinating settings, and one of the leanest big screen plots you'll find, Marty McFly's story is somehow both quintessentially 1980s and utterly timeless. Focusing in on the time travel mechanics, I'm going to quote again from the same article. Quote, "Fun and adventure might be Back to the Future's mission statement, but the franchise makes no concessions with its sci-fi elements. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale developed a tightly woven set of rules for traveling through time. And despite Michael J. Fox's constant meddling, the timeline shenanigans hold up, generally honoring the script's own logic," end quote. Quick refresher for anyone who hasn't seen Back to the Future recently. The time machine is the DeLorean, right? Doc Brown's car that he upcycles into a time-traveling vehicle.
Upcycles, yeah, I guess he does.
A crucial element to Doc Brown's science is the flux capacitor. The car also has convenient meters where you can see the current date, the date you want to travel to, and the most recent trip. Also famously, the DeLorean is powered by plutonium, and the flux capacitor takes 1.21 gigawatts of electricity to work. One final rule is that the car must be going over 88 miles per hour to make the jump. These highly specific tools for making the DeLorean work when it comes to time travel help to create a successful and understandable world for audiences, right? So like we can feel invested in these things when they inevitably go wrong because we know the rules and we know what the characters need to accomplish to get the time machine to hit 88 miles per hour or whatever.
Right. And rules are important.
Yes.
It's my preferred formula.
But they have to be accessible is my preferred formula.
Yes, sure. Also worth noting, it only runs on plutonium in the first one. After that,
It runs on garbage.
it runs on garbage.
Yeah. Going back to our earlier definitions, obviously a major plot point in Back to the Future is that you can alter the past and the future through time travel, right? Which is what causes a lot of the plot to unfold.
Right. But yeah, that's the one timeline that you can change, but there's no branches.
Right. Right. You're not creating alternate realities.
Correct.
In 2012, the film Looper, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis, was released. It's an interesting premise. Unlike many other films in the genre, time travel already exists, but only to the wealthy.
So I just rewatched this movie. I remember watching it when it came out. I'm like, "Ooh, this is cool." But this played around with some very interesting mechanics that you don't often see in time travel movies. So, yeah, to your point, it exists to the ultra wealthy, but sorta. It just became as soon as it was invented, it immediately became like top tier illegal, which makes sense, right? You're not gonna you can't meddling with the time stream is wildly dangerous.
Sure.
Because they follow Back to the Future rules. So you're not just making branching realities, like you can seriously fuck things up if it's not handled with extreme care. So the time travel only exists in like the crazy criminal underworld in the world of Looper. But the most interesting mechanic present in Looper is that, you have the future version in the present. The main character are Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis, and they play the same person, just young and old version. But it was in a scene with Paul Dano, where like he is one of the loopers, and so like the whole premise is that because for some inexplicable reason, or they do explain it, but it seems kind of softball, then you can't kill people in the future because it's impossible to dispose of their bodies. So, which for whatever reason, they have time travel, but they don't have a dumpster. But they send the people back in time, and then these people called loopers instantly kill them and then dispose of the bodies. That's just how crime gets rid of people, right? So Paul Dano is one of these loopers, and he gets in trouble because he breaks looper rules. And so when his future self gets sent to the present and starts like running amok, right? And that's like highly taboo in looper circles. They need to capture the future version so he's not just like running around the present, right?
Sure.
So what they do is they take Paul Dano, who they can still find, and then they just start carving messages into his skin. And then the scars appear on future version, who's in the present, right?
Sure.
They appear on old Paul Dano,
Yeah.
right? Saying, like, come here 15 minutes. And like for every few moments that he's delaying, like bits of his body are just disappearing as they surgically remove fingers and arms and feet, you know, to the point where the guy's like, by the time he gets to the door, he's like stumps, right? Because they can't kill him because that changes timelines, I guess, but they still need to capture him. So they just do this by fucking with his present self.
Wow, that's super intense and dark.
It was. And I was like, this is like Back to the Future, but crazy, crazy dark.
Yeah. When I saw Interstellar in the theater, when it was released in 2014, I loved it, but everyone that I was with hated it. It's, I guess, quite polarizing. But I found an article that analyzes the time travel in depth, and I think it's interesting to talk about it a little bit. So Interstellar was directed by Christopher Nolan. It stars Matthew McConaughey, Jessica Chastain, among other A-listers. The idea is that the Earth is becoming uninhabitable due to environmental disasters, and one scientist is plotting a way to move the population to a new home through a wormhole. This is a really great example of a film where time acts differently in space. Again, calling back to those early religious myths. The Wondrium article by David K. Johnson, PhD, breaks this down in very extreme detail. Without spoiling too much, the general analysis is that Interstellar consists of casual time loops. Quoting from the article, quote, "The protagonist's casual loop in Interstellar is that a future version of Cooper in a black hole creates the dust patterns that lead the past Cooper to act in a way that prompts his travel to the black hole. There is also a secondary time mechanic, how the passage of time differs depending where the characters are. Quote, in Interstellar, when Cooper and his team reach Miller's planet, they are stuck on it for a few hours after damage to their engines. When they return to their spaceship after a few hours, they find out that 23 years have elapsed on the ship and on Earth," end quote.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm not at all versed in time dilation when it comes to just gravitational differences, but my understanding is that the closer you get to like the center of the black hole, the faster the world outside of the gravitational well passes.
Right.
So that's why like there's the little meme of, you know, that little maneuver just cost us however many years.
Yeah.
Because they just dip a tiny bit closer to the center of the gravitational well. And I just thought that was so neat.
Oh, yeah. That movie, I loved it.
Great. It's a great movie. I don't know. I understand that a lot of people had a problem with the science because the movie presents itself with so much like, here is scientific fact, but then takes a lot of liberties that just say, you know, math be damned. We're just making this up, but they don't make it clear what's what.
No, also, it's a Hollywood film starring Matthew McConaughey. Like, it's not a documentary. You know, let's give it a pass.
I'm right there with you. I have no problem with people taking liberties. That was just the way it was explained to me, where if you present yourself as a science-forward film,
yeah,
and then take some serious liberties without being clear about that, then like, no, I get that.
Sure. The same year that Interstellar was released, another time travel movie hit theaters. Edge of Tomorrow, starring Emily Blunt, Bill Paxton, and Tom Cruise. A squarely time loop movie.
I love Edge of Tomorrow. It's freaking cool. It's like if Groundhog Day actually had like cool action, you know? So yeah, you have Tom Cruise who gets splashed in alien blood, and that causes him to relive the same day again and again. And this day happens to be the biggest military failure when the Earth is trying to fight off the aliens because the aliens have time technology. Edge of Tomorrow, I think, was the rebranded name, if I'm not mistaken. There was another name when this film came out. Was it Live, Die, Repeat? I think that's the movie where they changed the name like mid-distribution. It was something crazy, or right after it came out of theaters or something, because the movie was underperforming. And then they changed the name and people loved it. But I remember just reading how it was supposed to be inspired by video games where you just keep playing the same level again and again. You just have to memorize where the enemies are.
Sure.
Just to get to not die. And yeah, it's a really fun movie with like lots of action-y sequences. Tom Cruise is great in it. And yes, it's a classic Type 4 time loop, time travel film.
There you go. 2014 was a big year for time travel. Another film that has an interesting premise is Coherence. The official description of this film on Google, quote, 8 friends at a dinner party experience a troubling chain of events due to the malevolent influence of a passing comet, end quote.
Did you see this?
No, but I looked it up. I thought it sounded like a cool movie.
Why didn't we watch it?
We will.
Okay.
There's still time.
It sounds cool. I want to see this.
A few years earlier, in 2007, Spanish audiences got a film named Time Crimes.
You had Time Crimes in your outline?
Of course.
Wow.
You've been talking about Time Crimes for last month.
Freaking love Time Crimes. So we did watch Time Crimes together.
We did.
First off, I got to start off by saying the whole reason I saw Time Crimes, because it is a small, obscure movie that ended up getting a bit of a cult following. But, you know, when it came out, again, it's a very small, low-budget film. This was back when Netflix had, like, star ratings per film. Like, after you watched something or, you know, you rented the DVD in the mail, you rated it out of 5 stars. And then it would give you recommendations, right? I used to rate absolutely everything very diligently. And so, and very critically as well. Every so often, Netflix would just recommend a movie and say, 5 stars, you're going to love this. And I would just always watch it, and it was always spot on. This was before the days of Netflix originals where they had to get rid of their star rating because their original content was getting bashed. This movie just was recommended to me. I watched it with a good friend. We went in completely blind. We assumed it had something to do with time, but, you know, who knows? And just what a ride. What a crazy, crazy ride.
Yeah, it's great. I enjoyed it. I think it's simple, which for someone like me is the key to success because, you know, it's a super satisfying ending. It kind of all comes together. The time rules make sense. And it's kind of like one of those things where you see you're like a step behind the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, as you know, this one character, Hector, the main character, is kind of putting things together, figuring out what happened to him. You're like one step behind. So when you finally get to the end, you're like, great. So I loved it. I thought it was great. Again, it's in Spanish. Aesthetically, I thought it was beautiful. There was funny moments that had me giggling, and some moments that really felt like horror in some ways. Like only a few cast members, only a few locations, really made kind of like the time elements, again, digestible.
I'd say this is one of the best examples of a time travel horror film. Because, like, yeah, things get deranged and horrific as, you know, Hector just kind of like falls further into his madness of trying to fix this unalterable timeline. Everything that's happened has already happened, but then he realizes he has to just like play these roles.
Yeah.
While still making conscientious decisions, which is such a mind fuck.
Yeah, it is. It's excellent. I would say one of my top of all the films that we're talking about today, certainly one of my top.
Agreed.
Though time travel certainly is more universally science fiction than horror, there are still a few examples that are firmly horror. Happy Death Day, which we referred to earlier, from 2017, and its sequel from 2 years later, Happy Death Day to You, both of which I believe are very similar to like Groundhog Day, but with horror.
Yeah, another thing I'm ashamed to say I haven't seen.
Yeah, I don't think they're that amazing, but
I think I'm going to love it. That sounds like an amazing time.
you can't watch every movie ever made, you know?
But I want to watch that one.
Donnie Darko isn't horror necessarily, but it's dark and it's intense. I love Donnie Darko. It's from 2001, and it falls into the information about the future category. Very similar to Premonition from 2007, also horror, which stars Sandy Bullock. I also put out a poll on Instagram and Twitter, and almost universally, folks claimed Primer from 2004 to be one of the best horror time travel films. Though it should be noted, and many people pointed this out to me, that the director was arrested for domestic violence, so he's been canceled.
Well, I tried to watch Primer multiple times.
I did too.
You can't find it for free.
Yeah.
And normally, like if we're renting a movie, we got to make, you can't just put it on in the background. You got to pay attention to it.
We're also not going to give money to an abuser, so I think we made the right choice.
Sure. Oh, also, one theme, I'd say a common theme with a lot of these time travel movies is things are very, very normal for like the whole first act of the film. because you're establishing just like the world, right?
Yep.
And then the time travel part starts and then the movie gets bananas. A great example of this was the movie Intersect, where just people working on a machine, and it's just all this like drama about, they're trying to they're trying to make some kind of like time dilation thingy in like a physics lab, and there's it's a drama, basically. But then when they finally get the machine to work, it unleashes something from the Lovecraftian universe, which kind of is it starts in. Is it called intersect? Yeah, it intersects with a fourth dimensional being. So fourth dimension being time, and then just like crazy shit happens.
Cool.
That was a fun one. I like that. You just got to get through the slog of the drama.
Sure. Of course, time travel is also a major theme in many television shows. For example, Quantum Leap, Star Trek, and Doctor Who. Overall, right, there are endless examples of time travel across all types of pop culture, further validating the fascination that we as humans have with the concept of traveling through time.
You just softballed over one of the greatest time travel movies of all time. I was waiting for you to bring it up, and you didn't. Evil Dead 3: Army of Darkness.
I think we covered that film many times on this podcast before at length. I think the listeners are all hyper aware of your feelings on Army of Darkness.
It's so good. He goes back in time and fights the legions of the dead.
It's a bizarre movie.
It's so good.
I don't dislike it.
And talk about knowledge of the future. He has his chemistry textbook in the trunk, which is how he makes all his modern things. Come on. That's brilliant. And he fights a wizard.
He does fight a wizard.
Well, it's sort of a wizard. He's more of a necromancer, but he's evil Ash. The movie has layers on layers.
That's probably my favorite part, is that graveyard scene.
Oh, layers on layers. It's such a good film.
Should
we watch it now?
You can. I want to conclude by talking about something that we have absolutely no business talking about: conceptual time travel. I'm going to quote from a space.com article by Alisa, Harvey, and Vicky Stein, just to kind of read us out here, right? Quote, although many people are fascinated by the idea of changing the past or seeing the future before it's due, no person has ever demonstrated the kind of back and forth time travel or proposed a method of sending a person through significant periods of time that wouldn't destroy them on the way. And, as physicist Stephen Hawking pointed out in his book, Black Holes and Baby Universes, the best evidence we have that time travel is not possible and never will be is that we have not been invaded by hordes of tourists from the future. Science does support some amount of time bending, though. For example, physicist Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity proposes that time is an illusion that moves relative to an observer. An observer traveling near the speed of light will experience time, with all of its after effects, boredom, aging, etc., much more slowly than an observer at rest. That's why astronaut Scott Kelly aged ever so slightly less over the course of a year in orbit than his twin brother who stayed here on Earth. There are other scientific theories about time travel, include some weird physics that arise around wormholes, black holes, and string theory. For the most part, though, time travel remains the domain of an ever-growing array of science fiction books, movies, television shows, comics, video games, and more. End quote.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Stephen Hawking, because he did a really cool thing that I thought was, pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
He did a practical experiment to try to prove once and for all if time travel was possible. And he threw a party, a time traveler meetup in 2009.
Yeah.
But he didn't advertise it until after the fact. Nobody showed up.
Love Stephen Hawking.
So, all that does is prove that the unchangeable timeline, time theory number 1 or whatever it was,
sure,
is not the case. But, the whole branching multiple realities, who knows? Maybe there's a version where that party was hopping.
There you go.
And I'm just getting upset thinking about The Flash and all of his time travel shenanigans, where that is just whatever makes the most sense for his personal plot at the time.
You have to have the rules, everybody.
Yeah, those rules are so loosey-goosey. You can go, you go back and forth between different times. You're changing the present, you're changing the future. Other things, it's like, oh, no, I'm jumping to another reality because I can do that too. Also, like, I can't change anything because it's fixed, because that's an important thing for this monster of the week. It's dumb.
Not everything can be perfect.
But that's the Speed Force in a nutshell.
Everybody, again, we are so glad to be back. Thank you for your patience while we had many, many mental breakdowns and recovered. It feels great to be recording again and talking to you all. As always, next episode, we are going to explore time travel further by bringing it to light with a series of short stories written by many modern authors. And again, as I teased earlier, an excerpt from H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. You can also check that out in its entirety if you head over to the Fado podcast. Our friend John C. Cook over at the Fado podcast has actually already recorded The Time Machine by Wells in its entirety. He did this a while ago. It's available on his podcast. You know how much we love John Cook's voice. You're going to hear it next episode, and I'm going to tell you the same thing. But if you want to kind of get ahead of that going into the finale of this series and really dive into the source material, I would encourage you all to do so. As always, thank you so much for being here. Stay safe, stay spooky, and we'll talk to you soon.
See you next time.
Bye. Thanks for listening. If you'd like some bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon to access our patron-exclusive podcast, Horror Movie Club.
Also, head to lunaticsproject.com to check out our spooky merch and apparel.
You can find us at Lunatics Project on Twitter and TikTok, and The Lunatics Project on Instagram and YouTube, where you'll find our short horror films, cemetery tours, and so much more.
And please rate and review. A little feedback goes a long way to help us grow and get more content out there.
Our cover art is by Pilar Kep, and musical bumpers are by Michaela Papa and Jordan Moser.